So we're at a reserve here that's really, really large, and this is a really good example of the challenges about when you're doing bush regeneration and you've got limited time and resources. Where do you start? You want to make sure that you're going to get the best bang for your buck with the work that you do, that you're going to be helping the bushland as much as possible. So this site in particular has had volunteers working on it for a really long period of time, and it started off as quite a degraded site that had a lot of woody weeds on it. Now, luckily, we've had volunteers working so long and hard that we have very few woody weeds anymore, but we're really down to the more challenging weeds, which are the smaller ones. Challenging in the fact that it takes a much longer time to remove them, but also challenging is it makes it a lot harder to decide where to work. So we're on the edge of the reserve here, which means that it's always going to suffer from edge effects, meaning that there's always going to be sources of weeds coming in, whether that be from recreational users, whether that just be wind blown, because we've got a lot of just parks in this space with kikuyu and a lot of other plants that don't belong in a bushland reserve. But we really do have a lot more green, which is predominantly weeds at this time of the year, than anything else. There are the odd natives, which is great, but we've got a few smaller native species. And so you could decide that you're going to spend some time haloing around the natives that are here. But this is where it's really important to take a walk around the whole site and really have a look. If you're going to spend time haloing, are you going to do that to the detriment of another area that's better, and you could do less work to protect that space? And that's what's really important, because as a volunteer your time is incredibly precious, and certainly from someone who's worked with volunteers and as a volunteer, the last thing that anybody wants to see is for your time to be wasted. So we want to make sure that the effort that you put in is going to be returned threefold by nature, appreciating that space that you've created for it. So now we're on the same site as we were before, but we've had a bit more of a wander around, and we've discovered this absolutely magnificent, predominantly native space. So if you look behind me now, you'll see that there's also quite a bit of green here, but they are actually native ferns, as opposed to the area that we were in before. A lot of the green we were seeing was mostly spiraxis, which is a weed. So this area is completely flipped, where previously we were dealing with a mostly weedy area. Here we are dealing with a mostly native space, and this is where you want to focus your energies. And always remembering, if we don't protect the spaces that are in good quality condition now, they are going to deteriorate further. So it's that whole idea of triaging native spaces. If we don't do that and we spend our energies on sites that aren't so healthy, these good healthy spaces are going to go backwards, and we really don't want to see that. The beautiful thing about a space like this is there's not so much work to do. In this space, the main things that we're really dealing with are spiraxis and monodinium. And the spiraxis are not thick. So spiraxis and freesia can be one of those weeds that if you've got a really thick patch of it, it's very overwhelming. Where do you start? Where is it ever going to finish? In this space, they're so few and far between that I personally can see that we will actually finish this space eventually, and then we'll be able to start looking at, okay, which is the area that we can now move on to, which is the next best space that we can work in, and go from there. This is a long-term plan. You're going to see small changes over time, which will be really, really rewarding, and then in the long term you're going to see even bigger changes. The other really important thing is to make sure that not only do you assess your site when you first start working on it to find out which are the best areas to work in, best areas of bushland. But you want to make sure you do that on a reasonably regular basis, because as things are changing on your site, as you're doing more weed control, the site itself will change. The other thing you want to look out for is whether there's any new weeds that have been introduced to that site, because if you've only got a new weed and there's only 1 or 2 or 3 or 10 plants, it's pretty manageable to just whip those out quite quickly before they start spreading. But if you haven't done a walk over your site for 5 years and those plants came in 5 years ago, they may have now spread to be an almost unmanageable amount of plants. It's also important to do that so that you can actually just enjoy spending time on your site without having to do weed control. It's hard to not do weed control for all of us, but it's really important to just actually observe. Observe the birds that are using the space. Observe any little critters that you see using the space. Can you see diggings happening on your sites? What are they? Are they echidnas? Are they bandicoots? You might find that there's a particular species using your site, and it might be using the weediest parts of your site, but until you take that breath and take the time to walk around your site and have a look at those things without being weed focused and work focused, sometimes you miss the little details. Start making notes about what different birds and animals are using the site and what they're actually using. Is it beneficial to be pulling a particular weed? If it's providing habitat for a native, you may actually be doing a disservice to a native animal that's using that space, and we don't want to do that. We are actually preserving habitat so that we can preserve the beautiful native species that we have in the state of South Australia, and to make sure that they can live on into the future.